Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Jimenez, and welcome to week 2 of EDTC 614, Introduction to Distance Learning. And what I wanted to do was to give you a couple of what I call key primer definitions that you should know before we go further into our text. This week, you're going to be reading Clark and Mayer's chapters 1 and 2, where you're going to get into some very key foundational topics, especially around defining the key term of e-learning and what e-learning means. But it's important for you to understand, what does e-learning mean in the greater context of online learning, distance learning, synchronous, asynchronous. How are all these things working together to make some form of online/distance learning? And are these terms similar, the same? How are they different? So what I wanted to do was to give you this very brief video primer on some key definitions about online/distance learning. So let's get started. The first thing I want to get into is specifically the difference between distance and online learning. Now, what you'll find in most cases is that most people, when they hear distance learning or online learning, they tend to equate both of them as being the same thing. And in most cases, I would say, if you're looking at it from a modern definition of what online and distance learning means, it makes perfect sense that you would use these two terms interchangeably. But when you look at it from a historical perspective, as many of you did last week, during week 1, you looked at the timeline of distance learning. Not all distance learning in the past necessarily involved an online component, the correspondence courses being one example. In other cases, you may have had physical media that was sent to you, like in the mail, or maybe you brought home, such as a CD, I'm dating myself here, a VHS tape, an audio cassette tape, right? These were all forms of hard media where lessons were encoded within, and then you played it locally on your machine, but you weren't online necessarily, right? So when we think about it from a historical perspective, yes, there are various different ways of looking and understanding that distance and online learning can be different, because online learning implies that you have to be online. Distance learning implies there's some sort of distance between the two. But when you start to consider the modern age that we're in today, where our online technologies have become ubiquitous, especially here in the US. That's not necessarily the case when you go to other countries, where they may not necessarily have the infrastructure that we have in place, or ease of access, which is a topic that we'll get into later on in the semester. But when you start looking at distance learning and online learning as a whole, Berg, in her most recent definition, describes how distance learning is about the distance between the student and the teacher, the student and the instructor, right? There is some sort of distance between them, and that distance is bridged by the use of some form of technology. Now, many of you in the discussion boards talked about how, well, when I think about online, I'm thinking about the internet. I'm thinking about getting on the web, going on Facebook, going on Blackboard, as you are doing for this course, right? And you're not wrong. That's actually correct, right? But from a modern sensibility perspective, when you talk about distance learning, there is some sort of technology that's bridging the gap, that's bringing the connection between you and the instructor. And the most ubiquitous way that we're able to do that, of course, is through online learning, through a connection to the internet, which leads us to Popp's definition. And Alexandru Popp states that online learning refers to the idea of using online tools for learning. This can be any kind of online tool, right? Apps. This could be a learning management platform like Blackboard, Canvas, Schoology, Google Classrooms, etc., right? But because you are looking at online learning from the lens of, hey, you're connecting through the internet, you're using these different resources, there is an implied distance between you and the instructor. So therefore, online learning uses the internet to make learning happen. And when you consider that notion, well, in many ways, that is a true statement. Not always, but it is true because think about it. In this program, many of you are doing your master's degree. Some of you are doing your plus 30 certification. Yes, I do read all of your discussion posts. I have been picking up these little bits and pieces. Some of you are in other programs. But the point is, you are taking an online course. And there, by nature of that online course, there is a level of distance between myself and you, the student. And there's distance between each and every single one of you and each other and me, etc. Right? So that, I would say, in most cases, this is a true statement. Online learning is distance learning, and distance learning is online learning. The caveat I have to add, however, is, because of course there's always a caveat to everything, right? The caveat here is, what happens if you are in the classroom and you have students who are using a mobile phone as part of their current learning? Maybe they're using their phone, Google Chrome book, or maybe they're even using a tablet of some sort to access a Khan Academy video. Well, they're doing it in class, right? Maybe you're having them break up into small groups and they're looking at a Khan Academy video. That's online, but is it distance? Because in that case, that's one of the exceptions where the instructor and the students happen to be in the same geographical area together, but they're using online learning to help facilitate or to engage in further learning. So not all learning online, or not all online learning, is distance learning. So that's an important distinction to make. So in many cases, in today's modern sensibility of the definition, when we talk about distance learning, we're referring to online learning. When we talk about online learning in the classroom, especially in hybrid situations, where you're either having them, you're in a physical classroom, but you're having the use of online tools to support learning, that may not necessarily be distance learning. So I hope that that's an important distinction to understand. You can have, if you're dealing with an online class like this one, you're dealing with distance learning, right? If you're dealing with a physical classroom where students are in the classroom live with the instructor, and you also happen to be using online tools in the course to access information or to engage in a game or an activity like Kahoot, quizzes and things of that nature, that's online learning. But it's not necessarily distance because you happen to be in the same area together. So there's some, I would say, fine lines between each one. So when we talk about distance learning for the purposes of this course going forward, we're referring to online learning. When we refer to online learning, it's not always distance learning. Hopefully that point gets across to everyone. With that, two terms that have come up, and I've mentioned them myself, but I wanted to define them for you, and that is synchronous versus asynchronous. Now, by nature of this course that you're in, we are involved in what is called an asynchronous learning environment. Now, if we were doing a live webinar or a live, video chat, right, that's considered synchronous. So I'm going to refer you to Papa's definition. Papa's is a giant in the e-learning space. Many industry leaders seek Papa's for his articles in terms of distance learning, e-learning. And the way that he defines synchronous is that synchronous learning is learning that happens in real time, and there's immediate interaction and feedback between the learner and the instructor. So when it's live and you're engaging in a live conversation, whether it's video, whether it's via the phone, conference training, for those of you that may remember or may have heard of that in other industries, if you are engaged in live learning, it's synchronous, regardless of the mode that's being used. If you are engaged in asynchronous learning, Pappas describes asynchronous learning as learning that does not occur in real time, which means that these interactions can occur at any time. This is important because in our current course right now, for this video, this is a form of asynchronous learning. We are not on at the same time, right? But we're able to engage with these materials at our own leisure. And being that we're able to do so at our own leisure implies the fact that we are doing this asynchronously. The exception to this rule would be webinars, because webinars are live, which that would be a form of synchronous learning. So these are two terms that are going to come up over and over again. Definitely get familiar with the differences between them. Synchronous being live, asynchronous being not live. Another term that's going to come up, and this specifically will come up in the Clark and Mayer textbook in chapter 1 on page 8 specifically. Clark and Mayer give a definition for the word e-learning. Now, for those of you that have been either in other industries or may have heard of the term e-learning, e-learning in the past may have been seen as some sort of online instruction that you took on your own. It could be like anti-harassment training. It could be communicating with your colleagues. Some would look at some of the MOOCs, massive online open courses, such as edX, to name a few, or Udemy, I think it's Udemy, that offer these online courses or these e-learning courses. But not everything that is e-learning is necessarily some sort of static course. When you look at the definition, and what I like about Clark and Mayer's definition is that they broaden the term e-learning to encompass many things, which is going to tie back to our distance and online learning definitions. And that is, Clark and Mayer describe e-learning as instruction that is delivered on a digital device that is intended to support learning. And that includes any kind of media. It includes synchronous or asynchronous communications. It can be some sort of collaborative environment, discussions. Of course, there's a little typo there. Discussion boards via various devices, including tablets, phones, regular computers, etc. So the point of this definition, it broadens the entire perspective of what e-learning is. When we talk about e-learning, it's any kind of instruction that is facilitated through the use of some sort of a device. If you're using a phone, you're engaging in e-learning, which is basically online learning. In this case, you are engaging in this video that you're watching asynchronously, right? So therefore, this is a form of e-learning. So when we talk about e-learning in general, when we talk about online learning and distance learning, they're kind of different sides or different shades of the same coin for the purposes of our definitions. And these are the definitions that we will be using going forward. So when we talk about online learning, when we talk about e-learning and distance learning, in most cases, we are referring to the same thing, which will give you a great primer into what you're going to be reading over the course of the next week. In this case, week 2. So with that, if you have any questions about these definitions, let me know. Email me at rjimenez2@njcu.edu. I will do my best to get back to you within under 24 hours, and we will take it from there. Thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.